Corinthians in the Word of God, chapter 11, 2 Corinthians in the Word of God, chapter 11. Paul is dealing with the Corinthians here. Look at verse 5. For I suppose I was not a whit behind the very chiefest apostle. He's saying I wasn't lesser than any of the other apostles. And you notice this is a common theme with Paul writing to the Corinthians, constantly having to defend himself. And that shows you that they had a bad spirit at the church at Corinth. And you know, it's a shame because they didn't start out with a bad spirit. Paul started this church. Paul grew this church from the ground up. And then he went and continued his ministry. But somewhere along the line, they got bad people. They got a bad spirit. And it was they were doing the wrong thing. And you know, one bad person, one bad spirit can ruin everybody's spirit. You get one person in the house of the Lord with a divisive spirit. You get one person who's a negative person. You get one person who's a divisive person. They can cause issues in the church. And I believe this is what's happening in the church at Corinth. There's people causing problems. There's people with divisive spirits. There's people who are negative, complaining. And Paul is constantly having to defend himself. Think about that. The Apostle Paul having to defend himself. He's the Apostle Paul. He shouldn't have to keep defending himself, but he has to because they are attacking him. Verse 6, but though I be rude in speech, you see that word rude there in the Greek, it means basically idiotic, unlearned. And what Paul is saying, he's saying, you know what, I may not have been the best speaker, yet not in knowledge. Paul knew a lot. Paul was a wise man. And it's important to know the culture. Back in this culture, in this day and age, in Bible times, at this time, speakers were at an all-time high. If you were eloquent in speaking, you were somebody. You know, this was the influencers, best day and age. If you were good at orating, if you were good at influencing people, these people got paid. They got paid large sums of money back in Bible days. And even, you've heard of the term snake oil salesmen, people like that. They made a lot of money off of lying to people, off of just being, if you were just a good speaker, you could sell things to anybody. Think about it. Back in Bible days, they didn't have Google. Well, let me Google that. This guy's trying to sell me blinker fluid. Let me Google that and see if my car takes blinker fluid, or is trying to do this or trying to do that. But if you were a good orator, if you were a good speaker, you could make a lot of money. And I was reading some commentaries where a lot of commentaries believe that the Corinthians had issues with Paul. They would say, and a lot of these speakers back in Bible times, they would say, we have a message, pay us and we'll tell you. But Paul, he wasn't charging. So the people were thinking, well, if you're not charging for it, it must not be that important. Well, if you're not taking money for it, your message must, because these guys, they're saying, you pay us, we'll give you some knowledge from God. Theirs must be more important. Theirs must be right. But that wasn't the case. And, these people, they had a mixed way of thinking, kind of like how we, in our day and age, we assume, the more money you pay for something, the better quality you're getting. That's how we're wired in our culture. You pay for something cheap, you're going to get something cheap. You pay for something expensive, you're going to get something that holds up. That's not always the case, but that's how our minds are wired, and that's logical. And that's how these people were thinking. In the human mind, logically, well, if somebody's charging for something, then therefore they must be right. Paul's not charging, then he's probably not right. Then his probably is not that important. So you have to understand the Corinthians, they had that logical thinking, but it was incorrect. And Paul's dealing with all that at this time. So he's preaching, he didn't lack in knowledge, but we have been thoroughly made manifest among you in all things. Paul openly taught and preached the gospel. There's a story, William Barclay shares a story. There was a company of people, they were dining together. After the dinner, it was agreed that each should recite something. A well-known actor rose, and with all the resources of his dramatic art and being an actor and knowing how to just orate, he proclaimed the 23rd Psalm and sat down, and tremendous applause exploded throughout the room. A quiet man followed him. He too began to recite the 23rd Psalm. And at first there was a rather quietness that went through the room. But before he had ended, there was stillness that was more eloquent than any applause. When he had spoken the last words, there was silence. And then the actor leaned across the table and said, "Sir, I know the psalm, but you know the shepherd." And it's so very true. You know, a lot of these people, snake oil salesmen, if you were, coming and selling this, selling that, saying they have the right Jesus, they have the gospel, and selling all these things. They may have new parts. You know, the devil is very good at deceiving people because he knows enough truth to get people hooked. He knows enough truth to get people drawn in. And some of that makes the most dangerous denominations because they get, 80% right, 90% right, but then part of it's still false. And that part that's still false will send you to hell. But Paul, he knew the shepherd. And Paul, he was preaching from his heart. He was teaching from his heart. It's not that he couldn't charge, but he was trying to help the people. He's trying not to be a hindrance. He started the church, and he was thankful for the Macedonian church and their support for him. Verse 7, have I committed an offense in abasing myself that ye might be exalted because I have preached to you the gospel of God freely? That's what Paul's saying. Is it a hindrance that I've preached the gospel freely to you? Should I have charged you for the gospel? No, and we know that you don't charge people for salvation. You don't charge people for the gospel. The gospel is free. We have offering plates up here, but we don't charge. We don't have admission fee. Come in the door, all right, $20, take your seat. If you want to sit up front or in the back. No, that's not how it works. We're not charging people. People can donate freely and give to the Lord, give to the work of the Lord. But Paul was saying, you know what? Are you going to hold that against us? Did we commit an offense because we're preaching the gospel freely? I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. What Paul was saying, mainly the Macedonian church supported Paul's ministry. He's saying that church supported me so that I could take care of your ministry, so that I could build this church, so that I could minister to you people, and they were the most ungrateful. They weren't appreciative of what Paul was doing, how Paul was laboring, how Paul was ministering. And you know what? Instead of being grateful and listening to Paul, think about that. Paul was spending so much time in ministering to the Corinthians and teaching them. But yet, they were bad students. They didn't want to learn. They were combative. Isn't that the worst? When you're trying to help somebody and they're combative. When you're trying to help somebody and they're resisting it. You ever try and help a wounded animal? And they don't understand. They just want to bite you. They just want to hurt you. And, it's a shame because people are supposed to have brains, have minds to know when they're being helped. A wounded animal, they don't understand that you're trying to help them. But we as human beings, we're supposed to have enough sense to understand when somebody's trying to help us, when somebody's trying to do good for us, that we should take that help. So Paul, he was trying to help them. I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. He was being supported by other churches so that he could help the Corinthians, so that he could minister to the Corinthians. And he was serving this church. You've heard the phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. And that was the church at Corinth. They were the squeaky wheel. They got a lot of letters because they had a lot going wrong. You know, Paul wished that the Corinthians had it all together. Maybe they would have only needed one letter. Maybe they would have only needed 2 letters. But the church at Corinth, they had a lot going on. And we talked about that there was 4 letters at least recorded in scriptures that we know that was written. We have 1st and 2nd Corinthians. We don't have the last letter. We don't have the lamented letter. But we do know that, they had a lot wrong going on, and Paul was ministering to them. Paul was talking to them a lot, trying to help them, trying to get them back on track. Verse 9, and when I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable to no man. For that which was lacking to me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied, and in all things I have kept myself from being burdensome unto you, and so will I keep myself. Paul is saying, I wasn't a burden to the church. I wasn't hindering the work. The brethren in Macedonia helped me. Paul was a tent maker. He was an expert with leathers. He supported himself. He worked tirelessly. And yet, these people were not appreciative. Paul was not looking for applause. Paul wasn't even necessarily looking for appreciation. Paul wasn't looking to be attacked. And that's what was happening. He was there trying to help the people. And, it would have been nice to them appreciate it, but he wasn't expecting to be appreciated. He for sure wasn't expecting to be applauded, but he sure did not expect to be attacked by these people. They were attacking him. They were attacking his apostleship, saying, who made you an apostle? Who are you? And Paul had to constantly defend himself, but he was sent by God. He was certified by God. Paul worked tirelessly for the ministry. Many of you have heard the story. I've told it before. I enjoy it. It's a good story about a young man who wanted to serve the Lord. William Borden grew up in a family fortune of the Borden Milk Company. He was bright, gifted. He was an athlete. He had a mansion in Chicago. But he focused on Jesus Christ. In 1906, he was a freshman at Yale. He traveled to Nashville to attend a convention of the student volunteer movement devoted to the overseas missions. Missionary Samuel was a statesman there speaking, and he's talking about the maps and the countries, and his message melted Borden's heart regarding the Islamic world. Part of his message was, shall we stand by while millions continue under the curse and snare of false religion? Borden returned to Yale, committed to Muslim missions. In time, he gave his fortune to Christian causes and left the shores of America for China. But as he left with a condition called spinal meningitis. And he was dying, even en route to go be a missionary. But he had under his pillow one last message that remains, and it was published throughout the world in his biography and after he passed away from that. Under his pillow, he wrote and constantly looked at no reserve, no retreat, and finally, no regrets. No regrets. You say, how could he have no regrets? A young man dying gave his fortune away to missionaries. The world will look at that and say, what a waste. No, what a man who gave his life for the cause of Christ. He could have died with millions in the bank. What would that have done for him? But instead, he gave it to many, many causes to help mission fields all around the world. And that was the heart that Paul had. Paul wanted to help. Paul wanted to be there for people. Verse 10, as the truth of Christ is in me, no man shall stop me of this boasting in the regions of Achaia. Wherefore, because I love you not, God knoweth, but what I do, that I will do, that I may cut off occasion from them which desire occasion, that wherein they glory, they may be found, even as we. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. And in closing, we're going to recap this next week, Lord willing. But Paul was saying he's not ashamed of anything he did or said. Paul was saying the enemy is sly. The enemy can transform himself into light. You know, there are a lot of preachers, quotation marks, who claim to be called by God that are wicked people, that are wolves in sheep's clothing, using a so-called cloak of righteousness to say, follow me, I'm God's man, send me money, send me this, send me that. And they're wicked people. Satan himself transformed into an angel of light. You know, it's a shame. Ministries all around the world where supposedly righteous people were really devils. Look at Judas. Jesus Christ knew it. He didn't deceive Jesus Christ, but he deceived everybody else. He had everybody else fooled. And may I say this, we all have a choice, and we always have a choice. You know, there are people in ministry where I believe they started out on the right track, and I believe at one point they did love God, but somewhere along the line the devil got in there. And you need to be on the guard, you need to be on the lookout. Because it doesn't matter, you know, who you are. The devil can get in, the devil can wreck your life. And as Christians, we need to be people who are discerning people. There will be people who will try and destroy ministries. There will be people who try and destroy lives, destroy families. They appear as an angel of light. They want to help you. Oh, we're here to help. We want to do this. Let us counsel you. May I say this? We have a small church, so we don't have an issue with this. But, you know, if there's somebody going around trying to just want to counsel people, that's a problem. You know, I just don't go around offering, hey, let me counsel you, let me help you. You know, if people need help, we have the men in the church, you know, me, Brother Joe, my dad, and different ladies who are good women in this church who can help other ladies. And we want to help, but you know, there's people out there who just willingly saying, oh, we want to counsel, because they want to spread lies. They want to spread division, and that's a problem. Like I said, we have a good church. We have a wonderful church. We don't have issues with that. But be careful, because they can come and act as an angel of light, act as a good person, but they can give bad advice and ruin your life. And you need to be careful of that. Number one, you take counsel from the Word of God first and foremost. Number two, you take counsel from multiple people. You never take one person. There's safety in a multitude of counselors. So, like I said, we're going to revisit that and get more into that, because there's a lot about verse 14, and there's a lot that goes into that about the devil transforming himself into an angel of light. Really, it's a scary verse. And we need to be sober and vigilant, because the devil, he can appear as somebody that's good, but he's evil. So we're going to go into our prayer time at this time.